unfortunately, Valentina didn't make it, so I'm going to try to present as best as I can the semantic part of this talk, which is a very important part. But anyway, what I will try to do, just to explain you three things. First, I would like to highlight some weak point of the standard interpretation on island we already discussed yesterday and today. Then we'll try to present at our assumption a very unconventional approach to minimalist derivations, an approach when we try to derive sorry. Okay. Now I can see it. I can try to see it. Okay. It's any better? Let's say we try to derive island property just simply unrolling the derivation from a top-down left-to-right perspective, and then what we follow that island is a side effect of the movement operation. Pretty easy implementation and movement operation, in fact, will turn out to be not enough to explain why syntactic island in subject position are in fact somehow differentiable, and we will end up with a nice solution, empirical, descriptively adequate. So, as already been discussed, if an island would be a PF phenomena, so it would be a PF uninterpretable star feature responsible for the violation, a deletion of this star feature by the ellipsis would save the island. If that would be the whole story, actually, we wouldn't expect that adding an extra gap in the matrix clause will rescue an island as well. So we know, as already pointed out in the previous question, that there are different interpretations of parasitic gaps construction, but we will try to support the standard extraction idea. We'll see how. And then there are other theoretical problems. One already been discussed in our talk. That's the PF uninterpretable star feature will violate inclusiveness. I won't buy very easily the technical solution, semi-serious solution he proposed about putting an OK feature in a lexical item. That will be a problem in some way, but we can discuss it later. And no feature like the star feature are present in the derivation for convergence. So all features we use to derive a convergent derivation are either interpretable or uninterpretable in a sense that allow to create a correct configuration structure. And then the star feature looks really like a representational feature, which is somehow weird in a derivational system that allow to ship out things which are ungrammatical to the interface property of the interface system, so probably doesn't do the right job. You should exclude that before. And then it is not explanatory, so it would explain why deleting by ellipsis would save the island, but not explain why this is an island. So a more interpretative, a more descriptive, adequate approach will be the one proposed, for instance, by Nunes and Zuagereka, that try to derive in a derivational perspective something like the linear correspondence axiom, simply posing some economy condition on the way multiple spell out apply. So the only thing you can linearize in the same working space is the direct object and with respect to the head. So remain poor of air will be linearized in the same working space, but if you have a complex specify, you have to assemble it in an independent workspace and then spell it out, and then you take the label and you merge the label in a Z position. That's why if you have an island, you build your complex specified and you flatten it, as Lenny said before yesterday. And when you start merging things on the matrix clause, you reach the complementizer needs and you probably introduce an interpretable which feature, but you can't access anymore the things within the island. So that's why it's unacceptable. But they have somehow to resort to some last resort operation to derive parasitic gap construction. That's the idea of sideward movement. It's a pretty nice idea. So they simply assume that you can have a numeration which is somehow deficient. So you can build the adjunct with all lexical item units, but at some point when you start building the matrix working space, you find out that you don't have enough lexical element to fulfill some thematic relation. So what you can do, you keep open, so not spelling out the adjunct island, and then resort to the sideward movement, or use this very same element to fulfill the thematic required in the matrix clause, and then keep going. However, there are some problems. So they correctly, if this is the old story, so simply a missing element in enumeration would allow you to explain parasitic gap construction, you would exactly expect that complex NP is an island, because there is no way to extract an element from the island through the NP, which doesn't need any selection requirement. But then apparently a gap is tolerated in a complex NP when the complex NP is in subject position. So that's a big problem for them. And well, another problem is the order in which you compute the derivational work space. Essentially, they have to pose that before you build the adjunct derivational work space, and then you can start building the matrix work space. If not, you won't put it in the recorded position. But that's contrary to what we assume if you want to have some sort of late merge of adjunct and captures a very nice effect, Labo effects, etc. And then there is a more technical question that probably we can discuss later, but in many sense, when you have a numeration and a subnumeration, in general, if you have a lexicon, if you want to get a numeration from it, you have a complex problem, because you have a finite a set which has a certain number of items, and if you want to pick up a partition of this set, you will have 1,000 possibilities, and the number of possibilities grows exponentially with respect to the length of the set, and we have with such a growing exponential number of things to calculate, it's very hard to find out an effective algorithm that can process it. That's the idea. So a third approach, which is more syntactic, and try to actually the one who first proposed it was Takashi, tried to relate the island condition simply to some property of movement, and then was the basis also for the discussion in Stepan of 2007 and Mueller 2010. So essentially, we want to derive the fact that derive the subject is not in situ position and somehow island for extraction. And the idea, I just say the chains must be uniform, and adjunct to a part of a non-trivial chain or coordination is not allowed. So it was prevent an extraction from an A-bar chain, so you want to extract and then adjunct it to the edge of a VP, but you want either be able to skip this position, because movement also should be shorter, and as short as possible, so you will violate the shortest move condition if you just skip the edge position. And that's the idea. That the prediction and extraction is banned from all derived subject, but unfortunately, dependent of the position of the subject, there is no literature counterexample of this stuff, as we discussed. I don't have no story for Greek by now, but I mean, it seems to be possible that you can extract from an external argument. So which car was the driver pitch of water price seems to be pretty okay, and that probably a derived subject position. So our idea is try to still have a syntactic account sensitive to some semantic property, and our syntactic account actually goes in the opposite direction to the standard minimalist approach. No, we are not building structure from the bottom to top, but we are trying to build structure top down. So we expand the root of the tree, and then piece by piece, feature by feature, from left to right, we try to lexicalize a lexical item. So I will try to ask you a few seconds to follow me in a little technical question, but I think it's very important to try to formalize as explicitly as possible a minimalist grammar. I think the only one who succeeded in having a fully explicit formalized minimalist grammar is Stabler in 1997, and now there are a few other things coming on, but it's important because all the consequences you can derive are somehow for free if you are completely explicit, and you don't have some objective, subjective interpretations and an interpretable feature or whatever. So the lexicon, which is a static part of a grammatical minimalist grammar, it's a finite set of lexical items. We are interested not in phonetic, not even semantic at this point, but simply purely formal features, which are the feature would allow you to derive the correct linear structure. And in the lexicon, this as a part of a static grammar, there is also no lexicalized free structure. If you're familiar with tree adjoining grammar, you can see them as elementary trees or simply non-terminal rules in a rewriting system, Chomsky 1957. And another part, important part of your formalization are the structure building operation. That's why we want to have a derivational approach. It's to be much more restrictive that, I mean, a representational approach. And structure building operation gives you an algorithm to derive the structure in a certain order. So structure building operation are a finite set of operations that operates on, operates on feature and try to combine them in the correct way and derive the final position and interpretation. So we need three kinds of features. The first feature, the one to deal with selection properties, so a verb needs an argument, and this verb in the lexical will be marked with an XP prefix but an equal sign. Then you would need some functional features, and this functional feature might be optional sometimes, yet it's just prefix but a plus sign. If you don't find anything before a feature, this feature will be a head. In this system, we simply talk about V head and nominal head. And that's how a simple lexical item like runs looks like from a syntactic features point of view. We have here a functional feature, tense feature, and then a select features. Probably semantic point would tell you what kind of argument it is, but it doesn't matter by now. We ignore that. And that's how it looks non-terminal tree, some sort of empty tree structure that has to be lexicalized at some point in the derivation. So a CP will roughly correspond to its angled bracket, means an ordered set of features, so plus complementizers, plus tense, plus subject criteria, position, verbal head. And the DP will correspond to plus determinant and nominal verbal head. And we will call that, we'll see phase this. Okay, formally speaking, it wouldn't be anything else. So it would be enough just to try to build a lexicon and a grammar. But in fact, there are universal properties that we can include in the way feature structure are encoded in the lexical item. And this is a very dirty way to encode a linear corresponding axiom, but it works by now, it's okay. So select features can always, so selection property of a lexical item always come after the head. Functional features we impose always come before the lexical head. And then for this empty tree structure, we just assume there no need of semantic content, but surely there is no phonetic content. And then we assume there is just one head per empty lexical, empty tree. We call them, depending on the kind of head they have, nominal phases, which roughly correspond to DPs, and verbal phase, which roughly correspond to CPs. So as for structural building operation, the only new thing is expansion. So expansion simply tells you what you have to introduce in the free structure. So the minimal, technically, is the minimal set of dominance relation that are expected because you found a select feature in the lexicon. So the default, when you start building your structure, the default just comes for free. You pick up a non-terminal tree in your lexicon, you put it, and you start expanding the tree. Then you start feature by feature, try to lexicalize it. This is a sort of external merge. Actually, it's not exactly merge, but you pick up this element that bears exactly the feature you expect and try to put in that position. It happens most of the time that you just don't merge one single feature, but a bunch of features. So the feature introduced that are not expected would trigger movement in this system. So you remove the unexpected feature from the position when they are merged, and you put in what we call a memory buffer. So it's a very trivial computational device, something that allows you to keep in mind that you have an unsatisfied dependency, something that is unexpected in this point. And then this is depending on the feature you have. If you have two elements with the very same set of features, it's a last in, first out memory. So you first pick up the last element and then the second one, and so on. See an example. So there's a very simple grammar to deal with cyclic movement. So we have this is just a placeholder for phonological semantic features. That's at the heads. That's functional features plus WH plus tense plus subject and determinant. And there, this is a shortcut for select features. So you select an argument, a DP, by simply requirement an ordered set plus determinant and nominal. Or interrogative phrase is simply ordered set of plus WH, whatever it is, plus T plus subject criteria and verb. And then what's exactly the lexicon looks like. So we have functional feature ears at the head, and then placeholder phonetic and semantic phrase. A feature can be lexicalized also with empty phonological content. In this case, we'll use the empty phonological content for case. And this is designed to indicate that this is a non-lexicalized tree. So this is a non-terminal subject, and this is a non-terminal interrogative phrase structure. So the structural building operation are strictly ordered. So in all the derivation, you will apply them in certain order, and that's an important thing. Move would preempt always merge, as contrary to the standard assumption, but I think if you look at the literature, Richard proposed this approach, this would be a tenable assumption. So select is a very trivial operation. You simply pick up the first element, browsing the space of the feature from top down, left to right, without skipping anything. Extensive search for the feature. Expansion works like that. You find related to a lexical item an equal sign, and then you introduce in the phrase structure to the right edge of the tree what you expect. So what the lexicon tells you, it's equals XP features. Move operation, so you will have to satisfy some potentially functional or add feature. You will find in your memory buffer these features, and then that's the result of the merge operation. A very compact way, but just to let you understand quickly how it works. And insert, so you have so you pick up an element in the lexicon if you don't have anything in your memory buffer, and then you lexicalize, you introduce the phonological content, the semantic content, and potentially other feature in the phrase structure. So, as you can see, that's how the derivation unrolls, just to make an example. So it's an interrogative phrase. As you can see, the verbal head has sort of extended projection. So we have the verbal head up to the WH feature, so that's the complementizer, and then we have the three features we need to lexicalize. So that's the memory buffer related we're going to use to implement memory buffer. We select the first element in the structure. We don't have anything to move. We don't have anything in the memory buffer. So we pick up a first element in the lexicon. And this element turns out to have two extra features, plus determinate, plus nominal. That's what triggers a movement in the memory buffer. So we have this unsatisfied dependency. There is an argument there, and this argument is not expected. So you keep going in a very trivial way. And then three steps in a row, in just one. So you first expand a non-terminal subject. You then add some case marker to say, okay, the subject is happy like that. And then you pick up an element that satisfies this condition. This is feature on the cap now. The problem is, again, these two features are not expected in this position. So you move again this in the memory buffer, and now you keep going. Then you have, when you merge C from the lexicon, you have two select requirements. The first one pick up the first argument, and the second one pick up the second argument for the memory buffer. So at this point you are happy, so all features have been lexicalized, and you don't have anything else in the memory buffer, so no unsatisfied dependency. So far so good. That's a simple story. Our movement works in a single phase, but there are more phases, and it's important to distinguish two kinds of phases. So one phase is a results for the expansion of a functional features. You can add whatever you want, more feature, you have select features. The only requirement you have is to move the features that are expected in the memory buffer, and here you can do anything. If you have something from a memory buffer in the previous phase, you can use it to do anything. And you still have the requirement to satisfy at some point of the tree structure this thematic dependency or whatever dependency it is not expected. But then what you do when you reach the end of the structure, you discharge a memory buffer to the next sequential phase. So if you have the last, that's an important part. So if you have a last selection requirement on a lexical item, so you don't have anything else to do with the previous phase. You can close the phase, so discharge your memory, so start implementation, no tempering condition, but you keep track of your dependency, memory dependency, which is still unsatisfied. How you inherit the content of the memory buffer, and you keep going. And if you find a spot to merge the unexpected element, you are okay. If not, the sentence is bad. That's how we deal with successive cyclic movement. So the bold feature here are unexpected, so you move them in memory buffer, and then you keep going. You discharge the first one in thematic position, but then this last selected phase is in fact incompatible with what you find here, so you just discharge it in the content of the memory buffer or the next sequential phase, and then you keep going up, down the structure, as long as you don't find a correct position where you can be licensed. If you don't find them, or you have a pending dependency, the sentence is bad. So, following this perspective, every computation has top-down process divided in phases. A phase gets closed when the lowest selected position of its head is processed. This lowest selected complement constituted the next sequential phase. All unselected constituted are in fact nested phases, so they are processed that's important to remember. So the phases are introduced by an expansion of functional features. So, and they are processed while the superordinate phase has not been closed yet. In the move operation, just store and selected feature and selected functional feature in the memory buffer and discharge it either in the selected position on the next sequential phase. Okay. So what's Island do from this approach? So we really think that Cinque in 1978 was right. So extraction is not the standard option we have. Well, in fact, from this perspective, we don't talk about extraction, but licensing. And license is a sort of dependency license. Island are phases where a dependency requirement is introduced in a superordinate phase cannot be licensed. So let's see how it works here. If you have a subject island, you would expect to move elements which are expected in the island. Let's disregard by now what's happening here. You discharge the first dependency in the first thematic position, and then the sentence will turn out to be bad just because you don't have enough slots in the metric center when you introduce something which wasn't expected. We think this is the correct analysis both of a parasitic gap and of island, because if you have actually an extra, that's how we derived in 2005 the parasitic gap construction. So we assume that actually nested island can make a parasitic usage of the content of the memory buffer. It's something in your mind, so you can use it. You can use a resumptive pronoun, maybe whatever. And then, crucially, you won't discharge the content of the memory buffer. It has to be kept in the matrix clause. So at this point, nothing changed, and you still have an unsatisfied dependency. That's why the sentence is bad. And that's why, in fact, if you introduce an extra gap, you capture the parasitic gap construction. So you have the parasitic copy, you move the memory buffer, you move the first element in the first slot of the selected position, then you have the second one in the last slot. That's why the sentence is good, adding an extra gap. Unfortunately, it's not the whole story. So that will be a very neat intuition. So all preverbal subjects are nested phases, or they should be island. Unfortunately, it's not like that. There are at least 3 oppositions that turn out to be very crucial. So postverbal and preverbal position seems to be sensitive to island. Passive and accusative subject or external argument seems to be another feature important to be considered. And definite specificity and specific subject, again, as suggested in many works, seems to be another feature. Unfortunately, as hard as you try to put these features together, they turn out not to be categorical. So both the postverbal and preverbal position, internal or external argument, or also the presupposition turn out to pick up the wrong set of islands. So we need somehow to introduce something else, so to make these features conspire to have something which is somehow more computable, more direct. And our idea is just to introduce some interface property in our derivation. And what's crucial property, as Marta told before, it's a presuppositionality. So let's see how we introduce presuppositionality in our system. And we just try to also rely on the fact that subject island, for most speakers, preverbal subject island, very hard, somehow you get unstable judgment, just because we'll see there are many factors conspiring to make them island or not. And what's crucial for our approach is somehow related to the subject criteria position. So let's make a little semantic digression. So when you say that, actually it was an idea taken by Brentano, when you express a sentence, you can do 2 kinds of judgment, thetic and categorical judgment. So the first one, it's a very simple judgment where you accept or reject the existence of an object. If I say something, there is a unicorn in the garden, I simply say, you look out at the garden. Doesn't matter if you don't believe the unicorn exists. I'm the one who makes the existential commitment without that. If you express a categorical judgment, you do something else. You say, first introduce an object, and second, you accept or reject a property of the object. Every unicorn is immortal, something like that. Okay, these 2 distinctions, these 2 judgments have 2 properties. One is the nature of the DP, the other part will be the structure of the predicate. As for the nature of the DP, in thetic judgment, the subject DP is part of the description. So we fully interpret it as inside the description. In categorical judgment, instead, the DP is not part of the description, but it's entity denoting or generically quantified with a presupposed restriction. So as for the distinction with the predicate, we have with individual predicate, individual level predicates, scamming proper, we can only enter in categorical judgments. And that's the way we enter display later. It could be subject. And with stage level predicate, things are more complicated because they are compatible with the thetic judgments. and with a categorical judgments when you derive property by abstraction. So unicorns are in the garden. That's an abstraction. So our hypothesis, we try to relate the fact that static judgments fully reconstruct to the fact that for fully reconstructed DP you can extract. So static judgment allow for total reconstruction of the thematic position, and that doesn't happen for categorical judgment. So we will redub it a categorical judgment criterion. If you have a categorical judgment, you will interpret the subject in this position. And that should be independently also reported by Valentina in an old work, where they say actually with E-level predicates you can have a subject inversion because it doesn't satisfy. If you have a post-verbal subject, you don't have any way to satisfy a criteria position. That's why the sentence is bad. So then our idea is just to procrastinate the interpretation of the content of the memory buffer up to the thematic position, and then in this position to discharge some unwanted thematic dependencies. So that's how we implement this presuppositionality and non-presuppositionality in terms of delayed satisfaction. So that's something we need, however, to implement because of random movement, and something I discussed in a previous paper makes the grammar no more simply context-free as it was before, but mildly context-sensitive. It seems to be important thing. So, in subject of static judgment, you discharge the WH dependency can be delayed up to the place the reconstruction take place. In the extraction from the subject in categorical judgment, that doesn't happen because it's a natural nested phase. So, nor in the preverbal position or in the reconstruction position, we already have been spelled out, interpreted the subject. So what's exactly total reconstruction in a top-down system? So if you think about that, actually it's much more parsimonious view. So reconstruction is something weird in a bottom-up derivational approach because you have to just do some step and then go back and interpret a thing, or at least to have a representation of a thing, which very, very unconstrained from a logical point of view. This way, you simply say, okay, you have features that allow you to procrastinate the semantic interpretation of an element up to the thematic position. That's what explained is delayed completion. So in the delayed completion, you have few features which are unexpected, and because of these two features, you move the element in the memory buffer, you wait for interpreting semantically, and then you reconstruct the subject in the thematic position. You can discharge the content of the memory buffer in this position. So the more restrictive view that I told you before was simply to reconstruct on the last letter argument. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be empirically correct because depending on kind of structure we assume for double logic construction, but these are the features again which are unexpected, so you move them in the memory buffer, and then it's a sort of adjunctive features that to comply with UTA requirement, but it doesn't matter. So the first position you discharge the actual subject of the sentence, it will be the position in which you're trying to expand it to satisfy this thematic requirement, and that's why it's possible to extract from it. Because you fully reconstruct it, then you discharge a dependency in this position, and then you keep going, inserting new lexical item, because since you don't have anything more in your memory buffer. But we also succeed in interpreting the lack of total reconstruction, because have been reported by Kuroda and Ladu. So in category judgment, the mind of the judger must be directed first to the individual before the predicate can be computed to it. So it's somehow expected that a presupposed subject is fully interpreted in a criteria position. So the plus D and feature are in fact licensed in this position. And that's the general idea. So in fact, we need to use quantifier buffer. It's another part of the story. So it works pretty much like the movement buffer. If you have a quantifier, you have a bipartite structure. You have a lexical restriction, which is like right local to the quantifier buffer, and then you have a nucleus scope. You didn't build the nucleus scope when you try to process the QP, so that's why you need a memory buffer, just to keep track of the fact that you are missing something that is really to interpret the semantic structure. The result of this quantifier erasing operation, which goes left to right, is it co-index a variable and you move that in the memory buffer, and that would allow you to interpret in the correct position. And that's how we implement actually the high-level predicates as control predicates as suggested by Dizzy. So it's no real movement, in fact, what we predict. That's how it works. So you have a quantifier that forces the removal of the QP in a Q buffer, pretty wise like Cooper storage, and then you move a coindex variable in the memory buffer. You discharge a coindex variable which has the correct featural makeup in this, the relevant position, and then you attach the content, the QP, to the scope, to the correct scope, once you finish the processing the sentence. And then what's crucial here, in the criteria position, you have all the featural makeup. The things that force you to remove this element here to have a coindex variable is the quantificational nature of the subject. It's presupposed. So we can, the consequence, subject of individual level predicates are islands, since they're not inherent presupposition. And when you have a stage level predicate, somehow that's some variability. So they are both compatible with a category with aesthetic judgments. That's some problem that may give rise to different results. So, and there is also a nice story, I don't have too much mind to tell you, but very quickly, there is a contrast across languages. For instance, Italian reconstruction seems very bad with respect to subject position, and in English it is possible, but it's also more possible to extract from the subject position in English than in Italian. So our story is that, English doesn't matter what the subject has to rise in standard sense, has to be in a preverbal position because of the PP feature, probably because as suggested by Chesi or Cardinaletti, there are two different positions. One is a true criteria one, the other one is a PP feature for semantic, agreement feature, whatever you want. And this is not necessary in Italian because we have a program that satisfies it. So if you have a preverbal subject in English, doesn't mean, even at the right position, doesn't mean that is in fact a category judgment or presupposed judgment can be underlined, but it can be reconstructed because of the aesthetic judgment. That's how we explain the fact of which card they would damage by the explosion. So it would be a aesthetic judgment, not a category one. And that actually was a old data from Ross reported by Giurka. And Italian, well, things category position are not necessarily, if you move something, you can have a free inversion in Italian, so you can have a post-verbal subject. If you move something in preverbal position, that means you want to check the category judgment criterion. So that's why preverbal subjects are so island in Italian. And that's the idea. And that's the empirical prediction. We pretty much agree, the old speaker agree on the A and B. So no extraction from preverbal subject of the level predicates. Okay, extraction from post-verbal subject of stage level predicates. The other two, with the Italian speaker, we can test them later. The other two are somehow sensitive to the various factors, can be both thetic or categorical judgment. So we are forced, if you have a thetic judgment on the preverbal position, to interpret it as a categorical judgment. That's the idea. And that would be, well, last thing. Also object position actually turned out to be an island if, as I discussed in Indisi, somehow presuppositional. So for the very same reason, if you have a quantifier or if you lift, if you do some sort of type shifting, what we will have would be a nested island because we have to do QR to interpret the whole nuclear scope, and then that's why it's not permeable. It doesn't allow you to discharge a thematic dependency. That's how we capture for island during object. And then there are a few other problems, which you may see in the handout, not exactly a problem, but there's something to say, but just a summary. So just to make a brief summary of the whole story. So reversing the perspective from extraction to dischargement or licensing or dependency in a selected position, we somehow characterize a more natural way strong island as a nested phases. Unfortunately, it can be the old story, so we need somehow to add this idea of presuppositionality in category judgment versus delayed evaluation of thetic judgment. So presuppositionality, just QR a nested phases, just QR the DP and create a nested phase, while delayed evaluation would allow you in thetic judgment to reconstruct the DP and then to allow to license a thematic dependency over there. And that's nice because presuppositionality is somehow a derivational property. It just tells you when you have to semantically interpret a DP before or after the position is being encountered. And that's the thing. Thank you.
We have time for some questions. Yes?
I was wondering if you if you think about, I was thinking that you start to your talking about the star theory or the conjecture of Chomsky, and you introduced this critique to merchant theory of the PF Iceland. But the motivation for the merchant theory of Chomsky putting a star for marking an illness is Iceland repair effect. So, I mean, could you say something about the basic pattern of Iceland repair effect under this approach, or how do you think about that?
Do you mean if there is make any sense for us to have a start feature in a free structure?
No, I was wondering if your approach can handle with some basic pattern of Iceland repair effects.
So, well, just as we had a slide to say why sluicing doesn't work like the way it's supposed to work. So our idea is that you don't erase an island. The island wasn't there when you do the sluicing thing. What's our idea is that you simply delete an equative sentence, something like that. And that's proved by the fact that, I mean, merchant would expect if you have a non-stranding prepositional stranding language, it would by the preposition, but that doesn't happen in Italian, which is not a prepositional stranding language. So if you have something like, I had a dinner in a restaurant, very famous, but I don't remember which, you would expect it would say in which, but you easily say which. So that's what suggests that it in fact is an equative. Deletion is not an island. I think probably someone has a different opinion, but that's one part of the story. And the other part of the story, partially an answer to the Cedric question to Ambra and Marta's talk before. They say, okay, we don't want to ship things we will be ruled out by the interface system. So we want to ship things to the PF which are interpretable. So we want to say, okay, we just come out with something which won't be able to interpret. That's a very non-restrictive way. It violates their interface requirements. So that's why start feature doesn't make a sense for our point of view. Hope I answered.
No. Cedric was no? Okay.
Two brief related questions about points that you didn't get to in the presentation, but that came up in the last answer about p-stranding. There's a sense in which you're absolutely right that Merchant would predict that the Italian sentence shouldn't be good. But there's another sense, deeper sense, I think, in which you're wrong, because Merchant really doesn't have any deep explanation for the p-stranding correlation in the first place. So if other movement violations can be repaired by ellipsis, a priori one might expect p-stranding violations to be repaired by ellipsis. So he gave no theoretical reason for why that should be true, but he gave data from a couple of dozen languages indicating that it is true. So, so the first point is just that observation. Then a related question. So for the languages where the p-stranding correlation does hold, what would you say about those?
We have to look at data. We didn't think too much about that, but that's I mean, it was a crucial point that actually in Italian, since you don't have a pre-stranding, you can obviously have that. So the equative solution would be the standard solution. So we will choose equative. I mean, deletion was a standard approach to all this kind of data. But
Merchant at least claimed there are a couple dozen languages that he looked at where the correlation does hold. So then a related question with respect to the equative solution. Merchant, of course, for the very example you give, says that there is no island, but for another reason. He doesn't say it's an equative, just that the sort of inside of the relative clause is the whole source. I actually present some arguments against that, which would hold perhaps even more strongly against an equative approach. Namely, there are reconstruction phenomena that implicate something that was there in the island. So then the question is, in these p-stranding cases in Italian, interesting question, do you get reconstruction effects or not? If you don't, then that would strongly suggest that your approach is correct. But if you do, it would cast some doubt on it, I believe.
Which one it was?
Maybe something like I don't know, every author talked about some of his books, but I don't know exactly how many of his books. There, I think pretty strongly you get reconstruction, but every author talked about some of his books, and then somebody says, how many of his books was it? I think that's fairly bad on the relevant interpretation.
There are different books for every author if you reconstruct it.
Yeah.
I don't get it too much. I should think about that.
Okay.
It seems, but it could.
A question that has two sides, so you can pick whichever side you want to answer. What would be the prediction when it comes to WH phrases that are not thematically driven, like the adjuncts in this approach?
Do you mean WH? Well, are you referring to somehow adjunct islands? Or?
No. Like to WH adjuncts, like things like why, that have no deep reason for going back down, especially in, like, say, embedded construals, given that they are perfectly interpretable.
Yeah, I mean, if they are, usually they shouldn't be moved somehow. So you should, if you have an adjunct, it's a different story. That was the complex story I tried to skip. But, if you have an adjunct, it's something related to a functional feature. So why as well, probably something related to, I mean, I may expect that if you introduce a sentence with why, so you would project a different question, so a different CP. And then that's why you find this element in this position, and probably it's not fully selected in this position. But the free structure, the tree structure will allow you to pick up a selected element, and way will become somehow selected. That's the idea. On the other hand, when you have a purely adjunct element, that's a slightly complication of the picture, because most of the time you will find to the right, without reading something like that, so to the right of the head. So it's a general problem for all LCA kind of approaches. So why a specifier should be on the right? So our idea is some specifiers are more complex, right? More complex. That it's a matter of fact, empirical fact, that you can resort to some sort of rightward movement, or at least heavy NP shift or something like that. So that's why you decide to procrastinate the expansion of the select feature in a post-verbal position, in a post-that position, and then you will have the functional projection on the right. If this is the case,
the question was not about that part. It was simply about WH.
Yeah, I think WH, like why it should be, I mean, introduced in a different, not exactly the same structure we expect for interrogative sentences with what, and that's why you need to.
And so, what about WH phrases in C2? Like, how would you get island effects for those cases that are introduced?
If they are presuppositional, what could be the case, you would expect them to, I mean, that's WH islands in general could be another story. And
no. Like cases where the WH phrase is introduced, where, like, the overt WH phrase is introduced where it's supposed to be interpreted. How do you get the island effect, given that you never started introducing the WH phrase at the topmost position?
So you mean you can extract from the WH phrase which is in situ? That's.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
You mean if you have a WH? There are two things. One, I mean, you can easily interpret a criteria position by an empty operator, the language that allows you. So you have a complement in situ, which is a WH phrase that doesn't constitute a phase.
I'm talking about like Chinese.
Yeah.
What would be the prediction for WH phrases that are introduced in the position where they're supposed to be interpreted? How do you get the island if the WH phrase never started at the top?
Okay, so if you have a sort of empty movement, operator movement, that's the standard interpretation of violation of. Don't know.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but we will have to leave the question period here. Thank you.